Singing in public while wearing a swimsuit. Florida beaches are loud, colorful, and full of life, but believe it or not, there was a time when singing in public while wearing a swimsuit was illegal. Picture this. It's a hot afternoon in Miami Beach. Tourists are everywhere. A man steps out of the ocean wearing bright swim trunks, grabs a small speaker, and starts singing loudly while dancing down the boardwalk. People cheer, phones come out. It looks like a harmless vacation moment. But under this old Florida law, that cheerful beach performance could technically be considered illegal. The idea behind the law wasn't really about music, it was about public decency. Back when swimsuits were considered improper clothing outside the beach itself, lawmakers didn't want people treating public streets like party zones. So if you were wearing a swimsuit and decided to sing loudly in public spaces, you could be stopped. Not for noise, but for how you were dressed while doing it. Imagine a police officer walking up and saying, "Sir, the singing isn't the problem, it's the swimsuit." Today, this law is rarely enforced, but it shows how Florida once tried to control behavior in ways that now seem ridiculous. Unmarried women. Skydiving on Sundays. Florida is famous for adventure sports, especially skydiving. But under an old Florida law, unmarried women were once banned from skydiving on Sundays. Now, imagine this scene. A young woman arrives at a skydiving center early Sunday morning. She's nervous, but excited. She signs the waiver, puts on the jumpsuit, and walks toward the plane. Then an instructor stops her and asks a strange question. "Are you married?" If her answer was no, the jump was over, before it even began. This law was rooted in old moral and religious beliefs, where Sundays were considered sacred days meant for rest and worship, not thrill-seeking, especially for unmarried women. The logic? Married women were seen as settled. Unmarried women were expected to behave modestly and avoid risky activities at least one day a week. Today, the idea sounds absurd. No one checks marital status before jumping out of a plane. But the law shows how personal freedom was once tied to gender and marital status. It is a perfect reminder that laws don't always age well, even when they involve falling from the sky. Skateboarding without a license. In parts of Florida, skateboards were once treated like motor vehicles, which meant you technically needed a license to ride one. Now picture this. A teenage boy rides his skateboard down a quiet suburban sidewalk. No traffic, no danger, just wheels on concrete. Suddenly, a police car pulls up. The officer steps out and asks, "Do you have a license for that?" The kid laughs until he realizes the officer is serious. Because under certain city ordinances, skateboards were classified as vehicles, and riding one without permission or registration was illegal. The law was meant to control traffic and reduce accidents, but instead, it created bizarre situations where kids were treated like unlicensed drivers on wooden boards. Imagine failing a skateboard test, parallel parking, on a ramp. While most of these rules are no longer enforced, they highlight how lawmakers sometimes stretch definitions too far. In Florida, even a harmless ride down the sidewalk could turn into a legal issue. Parking an elephant requires paying the meter. Florida law once made something very clear. If you park an elephant, you still have to pay the meter. Now imagine this. A small parade moves through a downtown Florida street. Kids are cheering, cameras are flashing, and right in the middle of it all, an elephant calmly walks up to the curb. The handler ties the elephant to a parking meter and walks away to grab a coffee. 10 minutes later, a parking officer shows up. He doesn't question the elephant, he doesn't question reality. He looks at the meter and starts writing a ticket. Because under this strange law, animals, yes, even elephants, were considered equivalent to vehicles when tied or left in public spaces. The reason? Back in the day, horses, wagons, and large animals were common forms of transportation. Lawmakers didn't want people blocking streets or sidewalks, so they applied parking rules to anything taking up space. So technically, if an elephant took a parking spot and you didn't pay, you were breaking the law. Picture explaining that ticket later. "No, officer, I didn't forget to pay. I just didn't think my elephant needed quarters." Florida law didn't care. Public farting. After 6 p.m. on Thursdays. Yes, this one is real, and yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. In parts of Florida, Farting in public after 6 p.m. on Thursdays was once illegal. Now imagine this scene. It's Thursday evening. A man steps into a crowded elevator after work. Everyone's tired. It's quiet. Then suddenly, boom, instant regret. People look around. Someone coughs. Another person glares. Under this bizarre ordinance, that moment could technically be considered a public offense, depending on the time and location. The law wasn't really about gas. It was about public nuisance and decency. Lawmakers used extremely specific language to control behavior that disrupted public spaces. So if someone intentionally caused a disturbance, yes, even with their body, it could fall under public misconduct. Picture a police report reading, "Incident occurred at 6:03 p.m. Thursday. Cause biological." While no one is actually enforcing this today, it perfectly captures Florida's reputation for turning everyday human moments into legal absurdities. Sometimes timing really is everything. Sexual relations with a porcupine. This next law makes people uncomfortable for one simple reason. Why did it need to exist? Florida law specifically bans sexual relations with a porcupine. Now pause. Because laws aren't written randomly. They usually respond to something. Imagine lawmakers sitting in a room agreeing that this topic needed to be addressed officially. That alone tells you enough. The law falls under animal protection and anti-cruelty statutes. Florida wanted to make it crystal clear that no animal, especially wild animals, could be exploited or harmed. But the choice of wording, extremely specific. Picture a wildlife officer explaining this law to someone and realizing halfway through the sentence that society has failed. Thankfully, this law isn't tea about regular people, idios about closing legal loopholes and protecting animals from abuse. Still, every time it's read out loud, it reminds us that human behavior forced lawmakers to write things they never wanted to say. And once it's written, it stays there. Florida doesn't just have strange laws. It has laws that make you question humanity itself. Selling children on sidewalks. At first glance, this law sounds absurd, almost insulting, but Florida law explicitly states that selling children on sidewalks is illegal. Now imagine this scene. A busy Florida street. People walking, cars passing, vendors shouting. On the sidewalk, a man is arguing loudly, pointing toward a child standing beside him. Bystanders are confused. Someone calls the police, not because they think it's legal, but because they're horrified. This law exists because lawmakers once needed to clearly define human trafficking and child exploitation in public spaces. Back in the day, laws weren't as detailed as they are now. So legislators wrote things in very blunt, literal language to close loopholes. Today it sounds ridiculous, because of course selling children is illegal everywhere. But this law wasn't about stating the obvious. It was about ensuring zero ambiguity, no excuses, no gray areas, no technical defenses in court. Picture a judge saying, "The law is clear, sidewalk or not, this is illegal." Florida lawmakers made sure some crimes were spelled out in unmistakable terms, even if the wording now feels bizarre. Sometimes weird laws exist, not because society was strange, but because it was protecting the vulnerable. Men wearing strapless gowns. Florida once decided that men wearing strapless gowns was illegal. Yes, that was written into law. Now picture this. It's a costume party in downtown Florida. Music is loud, lights are flashing, and one man shows up wearing a long, elegant strapless gown. People laugh. Someone takes photos. Everyone's having fun. Except, technically, this could have been a crime. This law came from old-fashioned views on gender norms and public decency. Clothing was strictly defined, and anything outside those expectations was considered improper. Lawmakers believed public order depended on people dressing correctly, and if you didn't, the law was ready. Imagine being stopped by police and hearing, "Sir, the problem isn't the dress, it's the straps or lack of them." Today, such a law would be unthinkable. Fashion, self-expression, and identity are protected freedoms. But Florida's old statutes remind us how deeply governments once tried to control appearance, and how far society has come since then. Breaking more than 3 dishes per day, Florida once took clumsiness very seriously. According to an old law, breaking more than 3 dishes in a single day was illegal. Now imagine this, a busy restaurant kitchen. Plates clatter, orders pile up. A nervous waiter drops one plate, then another, then a third. Everyone laughs. Then, crash. Plate number 4 hits the floor. Suddenly, the laughter stops. Under this bizarre law, that 4th broken dish could technically turn an accident into an offense. The idea behind the rule was to discourage reckless behavior, waste, and disorder, especially in public businesses like taverns or inns. Lawmakers didn't care if it was an accident. They cared about chaos. Imagine explaining yourself in court. Your Honor, it was just a very slippery day. Thankfully, modern law recognizes accidents for what they are. But this statute shows how strict order once mattered more than common sense. In old Florida, even gravity had legal limits. Showering naked in public facilities. This law sounds impossible, but Florida once regulated how naked you were allowed to be while showering in public facilities. Now imagine this, a public beach restroom, sand on the floor, salt in the air. A man steps under the shower to rinse off after swimming. Naturally, he removes his clothes, because that's what showers are for. But under certain local Florida ordinances, being fully naked in public shower areas could be considered indecent exposure. The law wasn't trying to stop hygiene, it was trying to prevent discomfort. Lawmakers believed that even in places meant for bathing, public nudity should have limits. Picture someone being told, "Sir, you can shower, but not like that." Today, most public showers are designed with privacy in mind, making this law obsolete. But back then, Florida tried to balance sanitation with public decency and failed hilariously. It's a reminder that even common sense activities can become strange when lawmakers overthink them. Living with a porcupine. Florida lawmakers once decided that living with a porcupine should be illegal. Yes, living with one. Now picture this scene. A man opens the door of his small Florida apartment. Inside, a couch, a TV, and a porcupine casually sitting in the corner like a roommate. Under this law, that situation was illegal. The reason had nothing to do with humor. Porcupines are wild animals. Keeping them as pets posed risks to people, to property, and to the animal itself. Florida wanted to prevent unsafe exotic pet ownership long before it became a mainstream issue. Imagine animal control knocking on the door and saying, "Sir, we're here about the spikes." This law wasn't about punishing people, it was about protecting wildlife and preventing injuries. Still, the idea that someone had to be told not to live with a porcupine makes you wonder how wild things really got. Dogs must wear diapers in public buildings. This law paints a picture you can't unsee. In some parts of Florida, dogs were required to wear diapers in public buildings. Now imagine this, a city hall lobby, quiet, serious, government business happening everywhere. Then the doors open, and in walks a man carrying a small dog. But the dog isn't just walking, it's wearing a diaper. Under sanitation and health regulations, animals entering public buildings needed to meet cleanliness standards, and lawmakers chose diapers. Picture a security guard saying, "Sir, your paperwork is fine." The dog's diaper, however, is mandatory. This rule wasn't meant to be funny, it was meant to prevent messes and protect public hygiene. But it became one of Florida's most visually ridiculous laws. Today, service animal laws have replaced these regulations, but the image remains unforgettable. Florida doesn't just regulate behavior, it regulates diaper fashion for dogs. Tying an elephant to a parking meter. Without paying, Florida lawmakers really wanted to make one thing clear: if you tie an elephant to a parking meter, you must pay. Now imagine this, a downtown Florida street during a festival. Crowds gather, music plays. An elephant calmly stands near the curb, tied to a parking meter while its handler chats nearby. Everything seems fine, until a parking enforcement officer arrives. He checks the meter, expired, and without hesitation, he starts writing a ticket. This law existed because parking rules applied to anything occupying public space: wagons, horses, carts, and yes, elephants. Lawmakers weren't joking. If it blocked the street, it followed the rules. Imagine the handler arguing, "Officer, it's not a car," and the officer replying, "It's parked." Florida didn't care how many legs it had. Selling oranges on Sundays in the Sunshine State, this one feels almost illegal to say out loud. Florida once had a law banning the sale of oranges on Sundays. Now imagine this: a roadside fruit stand, bright oranges stacked high, tourists passing by. A customer reaches for an orange and asks, "How much?" The seller checks the calendar. Sunday. "Sorry," he says, "come back tomorrow." This law came from blue laws, which restricted business activities on Sundays for religious reasons. Ironically, oranges were Florida's pride, but not on Sundays. Lawmakers wanted one day of rest, even if it made no economic sense. Picture explaining this to tourists. You can buy souvenirs, just not oranges. Eventually, logic won, but the law remains one of Florida's most ironic restrictions. Imitating an animal in court. Florida law officially bans imitating an animal during court proceedings. And yes, it had to be written down. Now picture this: a courtroom, silent, serious. The judge speaks. Suddenly someone starts barking, mooing, or making animal noises to mock the proceedings. Under Florida law, that behavior could lead to contempt of court. The rule exists to protect the dignity of the legal system. Imagine a judge leaning forward and saying, "This is a courtroom, not a zoo." This law isn't strange because it is strict. It is strange because someone once tested the limits badly enough to force it into writing. Florida law closes every loophole, even the ones involving animal impressions. Florida proves one thing: laws may change, but weirdness never disappears. From elephants and oranges to porcupines and diapers, these laws remind us that history is stranger than fiction. And somewhere in Florida, a forgotten law is still waiting to surprise someone.